Greetings to all our viewers tuning into our channel. If this is your first time with us, please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the stories that are shaping the global economic and political landscape. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a question that seems simple on the surface, but holds the entire mystery of our era. What connects soybeans, America's fentanyl crisis, and the electric vehicles of the future? The answer can be summed up in just two words: China. In today's world, China is no longer just a country. It is the pivot point of globalization, a place through which every current flows, from energy and goods to data and technology. Every time Washington sneezes, Beijing takes its temperature. And every time Beijing tightens a single link in the supply chain, the entire world trembles in fear. That's a reality no one can deny, whether they love it or hate it. From the farms of Iowa to the battery plants in California, from fields of soybeans to electric vehicle assembly lines, traces of China are everywhere. It's not just about cheap goods, it's about the power of the system. A system in which Beijing controls raw materials, intermediate technologies, and even the decisions that shape global pricing. And across the Pacific, Donald Trump, the man who once branded himself the destroyer of the old order, understands this better than anyone. He knows that no matter how many times America wraps itself in the slogan, America First, the truth remains. The US and China are locked in the same economic cage. One side holds the market, the other holds the technology. One needs to sell, the other needs to buy. And in this relationship, part partnership, part rivalry, part strategic enmity, no one can walk away unscathed. That's why, when Trump and Xi Jinping step into a meeting room in Busan, the camera flashes don't just capture a handshake. They capture a pivotal moment in the world's story. Because behind the diplomatic smiles is a clash of willpower. Two superpowers trying to save face while buying time. Trump brings with him an obsession with trade deficits and the votes of Midwest farmers. Xi brings the pressure of a faltering economy and waves of domestic discontent. Amid this tension, they lay a document on the table, something called the Busan Agreement. It seems like a door to de-escalation, but in truth, it's merely a ceasefire, a pause in a long, grinding war between two empires, an agreement without signatures, without permanence, just a brief intermission between giants before the next round begins. The Busan Agreement, a name that at first glance sounds like a diplomatic victory, is in truth nothing more than a temporary ceasefire between two parties that have never truly trusted each other. After hours of closed-door meetings, Trump and Xi Jinping emerged with stiff smiles, shaking hands in front of the cameras. But behind those smiles, a storm of strategic tension was quietly brewing. According to the official announcements, both sides agreed to pause export control measures for 1 year. The US would reduce tariffs by 10% on select Chinese goods. In return, Beijing pledged to increase purchases of American soybeans, oil, and consumer products. Trump is set to visit Beijing in April, while Xi will attend the G20 summit in Washington this fall. On paper, it looks like a balanced, reconciliatory schedule, but in reality, it resembles a carefully arranged chessboard, meant more to buy time than to secure any true agreement. Washington wants more than that. Trump wants Beijing to open its technology sector, embrace transparency, and allow American companies access to the Chinese market without restrictions. But Beijing wants only one thing: for the US to loosen its grip on NVIDIA's semiconductor chips, the key to reviving China's AI capabilities, which have been stifled for the past 2 years. Both sides know the cost of giving ground. And so, neither side does. Trump's advisors call the Busan Agreement a short bridge to get through the election season. Meanwhile, Chinese state media describes it as a strategic pause to consolidate internal strength. Both leaders are stalling. Trump to gather more votes at home, Xi to maintain stability in the face of a crumbling real estate and credit sector that's cracking the foundations of public trust. Evan Medeiros, who once sat in the White House strategy room under Obama, put it bluntly: Busan isn't peace, it's a ceasefire with an expiration date, and the clock is ticking. In reality, every clause in the memorandum has been crafted to be reversible at a moment's notice. Every commitment is followed by a fine print disclaimer, subject to market conditions, which means one price swing, one off-key speech, one tweet from Trump, and the whole deal could vanish like sea foam. But if we look deeper, Busan isn't just about trade. It's a test of willpower. It's Trump's way of measuring how far Xi is willing to go, and Xi's way of seeing how firmly Trump will stick to his word. Two leaders, standing on opposite cliffs of the same world, where every move, every breath echoes through the heartbeat of the global economy. And then, amid all the negotiations about soybeans, tariffs, and semiconductor chips, one name surfaces quietly: Russia. Trump wants to know, is Xi willing to abandon Putin in exchange for economic peace with the United States? That question hangs in the room like a knife on the table. No one answers. But everyone understands. Behind the polite smiles in Busan stands the shadow of Moscow, silent, dangerous, and impossible to remove from the board. And from that moment on, the game between Trump, Xi, and Putin begins. Not with a declaration, but in silence. In the meeting room in Busan, after the diplomatic smiles had faded and the recording devices were switched off, Trump suddenly asked a question that stunned the entire Chinese delegation. Can you stop fueling Putin? His voice was slow, steady, and cold, like a litmus test. The room fell into a silence so deep, one could hear the wind slipping through the cracks in the window. Trump knew exactly what he was doing. To defeat Russia on the battlefield in Ukraine, the U.S. needed to do what sanctions alone could not: cut off the economic lifeline flowing from Beijing to Moscow. He believed that if Xi Jinping agreed to scale back purchases of Russian oil, gas, and precious metals, Putin's war machine would sputter out in a matter of months. It would be a strike that weakened Moscow while isolating China, a single move with double impact. But Xi was not someone easily swayed. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he offered a faint smile and replied in a voice meticulously measured, "A stable China requires a Russia that doesn't collapse." It sounded diplomatic, but the message was cold and clear. Beijing will not let Russia fall. To China, Russia is not just a trading partner, it's a geopolitical shield. A Russia under Western sanctions provides Beijing with breathing room, a buffer. If Moscow crumbles, the spotlight of NATO will beam directly onto China's borders. And in Xi's eyes, that would be worse than any trade loss. Trump saw it, but he still played his final card. Putin will drag you down. A failed Russia is your chance to lead Asia. But Xi simply shook his head. In Chinese strategic thinking, power doesn't lie in winning quickly. It lies in making the opponent fight long. China doesn't need Russia to win. It just needs Russia not to lose. A Moscow strong enough to tie up NATO, but weak enough to depend on Beijing. That's the perfect play. When the conversation ended, Trump walked out of the room with a face colder than when he entered. He knew he had just lost a round in a game where his opponent had seen 10 moves ahead. Because while Washington was pouring money into the war in Ukraine, Beijing was quietly opening a new front. A war without gunfire, but with far more destructive power than any armed conflict. The war over resources and technology. Xi Jinping understood that in the 21st century, the real weapons aren't bombs or bullets. They're the things small enough to fit in the palm of your hand: the chip, the battery, and rare earth minerals. And the moment he left Busan, he was already preparing to play that card. A counterattack launched in silence, without a single shot fired, but capable of shaking the foundations of America's entire supply chain. From the chessboard of Russia, the world was now shifting to a new game, the game of invisible elements, where resources become the new weapons of power. Evan Medeiros, former U.S. National Security Advisor, once said something that sent a chill down the spine of Western political circles. In the 21st century, the most dangerous weapon isn't nuclear, it's rare earths. And China, patient as an ancient chess master, has quietly turned that once overlooked resource into the most powerful strategic lever in the world. Rare earths aren't actually rare. They're scattered across the globe, from the deserts of Australia to the soil beneath the US. But only China was willing to pay the price to control them. Decades of investment, accepting environmental degradation, digging deep into the Earth's crust, and most importantly, building an entire ecosystem of processing, refining, and export infrastructure. While the rest of the world argued over profits, Beijing had already seized control of 90% of global production capacity. And when Trump launched his tariff war, slapping Chinese goods with rates as high as 150%, Xi Jinping responded with a move as subtle as it was devastating. He cut off rare earth exports to the US. That was the moment Washington realized the most painful blow didn't come from the military, but from the periodic table. Without rare earths, EV batteries stop running. Without rare earths, military radars become scrap metal. Without rare earths, semiconductors, satellites, and the entire US defense industry begin to choke. Busan bought the US one more year of ceasefire, but to rebuild an independent supply chain, they would need at least a decade. In the meantime, all China has to do is shut down a single mine or delay a few shipments, and the American tech industry starts to wobble. A blow with no blood, no bullets, but enough to keep the White House awake at night. Trump understood this dependency all too well. He reached out to Australia, Canada, and Japan to sign new mining agreements, but they were nothing more than band-aids on a deep wound. Because the problem isn't in the mines, it's in the refining technology, a field where on opposite ends of the chessboard, Southeast Asia finds itself caught in the turbulent air between two opposing winds. On one side is Washington, with promises of freedom of navigation, regional security, and a long-term commitment to Asia. On the other, to still developing Laos, know full well, staying neutral doesn't mean staying untouched. For countries like Malaysia, Thailand, or Vietnam, and high-speed rail lines linking Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and Malaysia, ASEAN governments eager for funding and desperate for development couldn't say no. But behind every loan is a tightening debt chain, slowly drawing closer. Trump understood that economics is the new battlefield, but instead of building a shared rulebook, he chose to negotiate bilaterally, with each nation, each deal, each number. That approach might bring short-term wins for America, but it erodes the US's long-held role as the architect of regional order. To ASEAN, it feels like living next to a giant with unpredictable moods, smiling today, slapping on tariffs tomorrow. China, on the other hand, plays a different game. Beijing says little but acts deliberately. It opens Confucius Institutes in every ASEAN capital, offers scholarships, builds factories, funds news outlets, and gradually weaves a soft power web across the region. When the US criticizes, China simply replies, "We don't interfere in anyone's internal affairs." A polite denial, but everyone knows that influence doesn't always need force. Sometimes all it needs is to be there long enough. For countries like Vietnam, the Philippines, or Indonesia, the choice has never been harder. They want balance, but the scale tilts more and more toward China. Not out of affection for Beijing, but from a growing doubt that Washington will stick around. When ASEAN leaders meet, they all speak of strategic neutrality, but deep down they understand, in a polarized world, not choosing a side is, in itself, a choice. And amid the diplomatic smiles and cooperation statements, there's a lingering unease. If the wind from Beijing grows stronger, how long can Southeast Asian nations stay upright before they're swept into the storm of power politics? That question remains unanswered. But it is already opening the next chapter of our era, one where Asia becomes the new center of the global contest. Many believe the world has returned to a G2 era, where the US and China split global power and together hold the axis of influence. But in reality, that's just an illusion. The world of 2025 is no longer a two-pole stage. It's a three-power maze where boundaries are blurring and the old order is being rewritten. Evan Medeiros, who once sat behind closed doors in the White House, put it bluntly, Trump didn't bring the world back to G2. He's pushing it into a multipolar era faster than ever. And he was right. The West, led by the US, Europe, Japan, and South Korea, is still wealthy, still powerful, but increasingly weary. Weighed down by internal political infighting, endless elections, and debates over immigration and green technology, they still possess strength but lack the will to lead the world. The East, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, is working to build an alliance against the old order. But this isn't a bloc bound by shared values, it's an alliance of fear and calculation. They're not united by ideals, but by a common enemy, the West. And in between these two spheres, a new force is emerging, the global South. From India to Brazil, from Indonesia to South Africa, from Saudi Arabia to Vietnam, these rising nations don't want to be pawns on a board controlled by giants. They seek their own path, leveraging the conflict to rise, reclaiming the positions stripped from them for centuries. We are living in a strange era, where power is no longer measured by armies or GDP, but by the ability to adapt and control global supply chains. A world where rare earths can replace bullets, and a single tweet from a president can rattle entire stock markets.
No photo pinch?
In this world, America is still a superpower, but no longer the only center of gravity. If Washington continues to retreat, turning its back on globalization, politicizing trade, and breaking down international agreements, then China will quietly fill that vacuum, not with force, but with contracts, infrastructure, and time. Napoleon once said, "Never interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake." And perhaps Xi Jinping is doing just that, not defeating America, but patiently waiting for it to shrink itself. While Washington wraps itself in slogans like, "Make America Great Again," Beijing patiently rewrites the rules of globalization. And the world, tired of chaos, is beginning to see China as a pillar of stability, even if no one truly trusts it. That is the paradox of our time. Trust is being replaced by the lesser evil. Trump and Xi may shake hands, may smile for the cameras, but they both know, beneath that handshake lies a chasm of power. One needs technology, the other needs markets. One seeks dominance, the other seeks control. No one can win outright. They can only coexist through conflict, like two planets orbiting each other, colliding just enough to maintain balance. This world is no longer G2. It's not G0 either, a chaotic, leaderless void. We're entering an unspoken G3 era, where the West, the East, and the global South pull against each other in a complex dance of power, interests, and fear. A world where no one is strong enough to rule alone, but no one is weak enough to be left behind. And perhaps in the moment Trump and Xi walked out of Busan, each carried the same quiet fear. The world they're trying to control may already be slipping beyond them. Because today, power doesn't lie in the hands of a single leader. It flows through technology, data, resources, and trust, forces no nation can monopolize forever. Ladies and gentlemen, we are standing at the hinge of an era. A three-pole world is taking shape, and each of us, whether in Vietnam, the US, or anywhere else, is a witness to that moment. Is this a transition into a new order or the beginning of prolonged chaos? The answer is still unwritten, and history will be the final judge. If you have thoughts, perspectives, or personal reflections on the meeting between Trump and Xi Jinping, please share them in the comments below. We're eager to hear your voices, those of you who are watching the world with clear eyes and open hearts. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next stories, where together we'll continue exploring the turning points that are shaping humanity's destiny.